In the months since Joe Biden took office, the U.S. Mexico border has seen the biggest surge of illegal crossings in decades, perhaps ever. Now, it's one thing to talk about a crisis of this magnitude, but I decided I needed to go down and actually see this with my own eyes. Coming up on this special edition of Hold the Line, I take you along on my recent trip to America's southern border and the crisis that's going on. Welcome to this special edition of Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. The Biden administration doesn't want you to know what's really happening. They have absolutely no interest in raising public consciousness, letting the American people know and see what's happening at our southern border. In fact, they are actively making it more difficult. They are putting people in positions in the federal government where they cannot or will not speak to members of the press, even public affairs officers, even those whose jobs it is to speak to people about what's happening. They don't want people to know. So I went down there anyway. I said, I want to know what's actually happening. Here are some of the things that you'll see in this special. One, the border is open. They can quibble, they can say, oh no, we're still turning some people back and there are some who are caught. If you know the rules of the game, if you understand the loopholes, and the cartels do, there's the overwhelming likelihood of being able to cross illegally into the United States and stay as long as you abide by some rules, which we'll get into later on in the program. Some loopholes are exploited in all of this. A lot of this is happening at the Rio Grande, and we'll address why is it that some groups of illegal crossings surrender, and yet others go to remote areas of the border. Here's a hint, it's to extend Border Patrol resources and to make sure that it's impossible for them to do the counter-narcotics and national security mission, as well as dealing with the humanitarian crisis. And then there's the processing that's going on. We went to one of these facilities and saw that it is enormous in scale and not nearly big enough, entirely overcrowded. So they're going to build another one and more after that. This shows you, what we saw with our own eyes down there, shows you that this crisis will only continue on. In fact, the Biden administration plan is to continue with an expansion of the processing facilities because they know that until they deal with the incentives, this surge of illegal migrants will continue. And then I spoke to the chief of the Rio Grande sector. And you have to see this interview because he speaks about the need to institute consequences. As in, as long as people feel like they can cross the border and there won't be anything negative that happens, as long as they feel like they'll be taken care of and they'll stay in the United States, they will continue to do this. The expectation has to shift because the cartels are making money hand over fist. Hundreds of millions of dollars by just bringing hundreds of thousands of migrants into the United States illegally. They're not going to stop. It makes their business of narcotics easier as well. By creating this chaos, by creating this lawlessness at our own border, the cartels are more able to poison American cities with fentanyl, with cocaine, with heroin. In fact, much of the drug violence that we see, where gangs are shooting at each other over turf, that's a direct result of the narcotics that they only have because of the flow from our southern border. It all ties in together. And when you speak to the chief of the Rio Grande sector, as I did, Chief Border Patrol Agent, and he tells you that their resources are beyond overtaxed, that they've never seen it this bad, and that they're being told to watch what they say because the Biden administration is playing politics with all this and they will punish people who try to speak the truth. You know what's really going on here. The Biden White House doesn't view illegal crossing at our border, doesn't view all of the attendant lawlessness that comes from this process as a problem to be stopped. They view it as a flow to be managed continuously. They will not institute consequences. And that's why I went even further out into the hinterlands, if you will, of the border, over 90 minutes drive west of McAllen, Texas, in a place called Fronton, where I was sitting at standing along with National Guard at an overlook point, and we could see through night vision goggles as the cartels were sending rafts across the border, and you could hear cartel gunfire in the distance from their ongoing drug war, and to send a reminder to everybody that as soon as you cross that border, as soon as you cross the Rio Grande and go south, they're in charge. They're calling the shots, with disastrous consequences for the migrant children and families who are coming up to the border, who are being trafficked by these savage cartels. Disastrous. Biden team has absolutely no means of handling this other than to try to suppress the truth. But we won't let them get away with that. We want you to see what's really happening. All right, after the break, I'll take you to the banks of the Rio Grande River with Border Patrol Union Agent Chris Cabrera. Stay right there. Welcome back. The first stop during my trip to the southern border was the banks of the Rio Grande River, where human traffickers and drug smugglers alike deliver their illicit cargo right into U.S. territory. Here's what we saw. I'm joined by Chris Cabrera. He is of Border Patrol. He's with the Union. We're at the Rio Grande. This is the Rio Grande right behind us. You can see major area for the trafficking of human beings and drugs. Chris, thanks so much for showing us what's going on here.
No, thank you for coming down.
So tell us just about how this area of operations works from the Border Patrol perspective, and what some of the primary challenges are that all of you face.
You know, we're not too far from built up areas here on our side. There's obviously just a few miles south it's built up on the Mexican side. So this is a major drug trafficking route, a human trafficking route. Just right here at the bends in the river, they bring people over in huge numbers, and they have people watching us, seeing which way we're going, when we're pulling our boats out of the water, when we have agents in the area. They have people on the Mexican side watching, and even people on the U.S. side that are watching our movement.
So these are cartel lookouts,
yeah,
making sure that they know when there's Border Patrol riverine operations going on, and following where your resources are so they can try to go in the gaps.
And we'll have people up in just on the other side of the levee. There's a little town, and people will be watching out for Border Patrol vehicles, and people will come get smuggled into that neighborhood, and then from there further north, and same with the drugs.
Are you seeing in recent months a surge in activity in this sector, in this area particularly?
Yeah. You know, interestingly enough, where we were at the other day, yesterday, there was a lot of people turning themselves in. That's about maybe 2 miles from here. On this side, nobody's turning themselves in. These are all the people that are trying to avoid detection, and these are the ones that are running. So it's kind of like night and day. That here they're trying to get away, over there they're just turning themselves in.
So people that cross the river then from Border Patrol perspective, they're not coming to surrender, right?
No.
If they're crossing the river, that's because they could just walk and surrender, as people have been doing in other spots along the border. So anyone who's crossing here, elevated likelihood that they'd be a prohibited person,
yeah,
even with the illegal crossing, beyond the illegal crossing, or they're drug smugglers usually.
Yeah, or they have, or whether they're not subject to the Remain in Mexico policy. Maybe they have criminal convictions that wouldn't allow them to any of those benefits, or they have some type of contraband on them.
And are you seeing the Border Patrol being more stretched as a result of what's going on downriver in different places? Is that a constant concern for you?
Downriver and upriver, we're having folks turning themselves in, and it's just little pockets in between that people are trying to get away, but most of our people are tied up in the processing duties, the transport duties, the non-enforcement duties, and that leaves less people, less manpower in the field to deal with the real threats that are coming in.
And have people been unsuccessfully crossing, and have there had to be rescue operations going on here too as part of that? I mean, obviously you've got a river. I mean, what's the depth and what kind of current are people facing who are crossing through the water, as opposed to showing up to surrender at a land port?
You know, at this area, the water looks nice and calm and peaceful, but it's actually under the surface. It moves pretty quick. The depth here, anywhere from 20 to 30 feet just in this area. We have had people that have not made it, that we found them, people that have drowned right around here in the corner on both sides of us. And we've also had the smugglers will come across with a raft full of people, and when they see our boats approaching, they'll dump the raft on purpose, knowing that our agents have a choice to either apprehend the smuggler or save the people, and obviously we're going to go save the people. so that that guy can get away.
What kind of a time frame when you see, because I know that there are surveillance, there's surveillance operations, surveillance cameras all along the U.S. side here of the Rio Grande. When someone decides if they've set it up and they're going to cross using a raft, any kind of boat, any kind of a craft, from that side to this side, generally, what's the time what's the time that it takes for them to be on U.S. soil? And we can see right over here. I mean, this is America right next to us.
Yeah, it's less than a minute to come across. They'll move real quick, and that's without a motor. That's just with a paddle boat or pushing, hanging onto some type of inner tube. But they can get across in less than a minute. A lot of times that raft or boat will be tied off to a truck on the Mexican side. So when our boats come down, they take off in that truck and it just zips it right back in there real quick.
And the cartel is aware of where your assets, your amphibious assets for Border Patrol are pretty much at all times, right?
Yeah.
It's wide open, they can't hide on the river.
Yeah, with us, I mean, you see we have these towers here that's watching the Mexican side for people trying to cross. Well, they have something similar. They have people up in the trees. And every, half mile or so, there's, half mile, quarter mile, there's people up in the trees at the bends watching us watch them.
Is there anything that could be done here that would assist Border Patrol with the mission of further securing the river? Is just more surveillance assets? Are there barriers, or just is there anything that could be done to help in that mission set?
Well, I think part of it is fixing the policies that right now are allowing so many people to turn themselves in, because that pulls our manpower away. So if we had that manpower back, we'd have more manpower to concentrate areas like this. We'd be able to drop more boats in the water to interdict people that are trying to come across, or whatever they're trying to bring across, whether it's drugs or people.
Chris, thanks so much. We'll have more from right here on the front lines at the border when we come back. Short on resources and stretched to their limits, the men and women of the U.S. Border Patrol are fighting a seemingly endless battle to stem the tide of adults and children illegally crossing into the United States. While I was down in Texas, I sat down with Chief Brian Hastings, who's the Chief Border Patrol agent for the Rio Grande sector, currently the busiest area for illegal border crossings. He gave us quite an overview. Here's what he had to say.
We are in the busiest part of the sector, or busiest sector in Border Patrol right now. RGV sector accounts for about 30% of all Border Patrol apprehensions and encounters right now. As of yesterday, we went over 200,000 apprehensions and encounters for the year.
What are you seeing primarily? Who's coming across, and what are some of the demographic and origin percentages? Where are people coming from? Who's showing up?
So far this fiscal year, for the most part, we have seen about almost 100,000 single adults, seen about 70,000 family members, and we've seen over 27,000 unaccompanied children so far this fiscal year. Now, the demographics, or the breakdown for that, is primarily we're seeing people from Honduras, followed by Mexico, or followed by Guatemala rather, and then Mexico, and then El Salvador. But it's important to remember those are the top 4 countries that we're seeing people cross illegally from. However, we've arrested people from up to 64 countries so far this fiscal year.
And countries as far away as, when you're saying, are they outside of this general vicinity? Are they coming from all over the globe?
Yeah, we've arrested individuals from China, individuals from Russia, individuals from various countries, up to 64 countries so far this year.
What has been the reason for the surge in so many more people coming, particularly in the unaccompanied minors and the family units?
So the issue that we're having right now, especially with the unaccompanied children that we're seeing crossover, is we really can't shut the valve off. So for Border Patrol, we make the encounter or the arrest, and then we're dependent upon turning them over to Health and Human Services by law within 72 hours. So we are dependent upon turning those individuals, those kids, over within 72 hours. There has been such a high flow rate of kids, up to 27,000 here in this sector alone, that HHS cannot act fast enough to take those kids out of our custody. Now, within the last couple weeks, we've seen them stand up multiple facilities, and they're starting to take the kids a lot quicker, but still not to the flow rate that we're seeing on the border right now. So we need HHS to act a little bit quicker. We're only supposed to have those kids in our custody for 72 hours. And a Border Patrol facility is no place to house kids beyond 72 hours.
What is the trend like for the last 90 days or so? Has it started to level off? Are we at a plateau, or are you expecting that there's still going to be a greater increase month to month, this current month, for example, to last month?
So last month we saw over 62,000 apprehensions and encounters just last month in March. So far this month, apprehensions are down a little bit, but the last 21 days, for example, we've still seen about an average of 2,068 encounters or apprehensions per day.
How many do you have in Border Patrol custody? How many individuals, migrants do you have in custody at any time?
So, like I said, we were in a bad place. If you would have looked back about 2.5 weeks ago, we stood up the Donna facility. The Donna facility, we had up to almost 5,000 people in custody just in that facility alone. Of that, 3,700 were children. As I said, HHS has done a great job in building some facilities and starting to move those kids out of our custody. But today we're still sitting at about 2,700 in custody and about 1,200 children still in our custody today.
What are your expectations for the months ahead going into the summer? Is it likely that you'll see a bit of a drop off? Could the numbers just continue with more crossing going on at night? What are the preparations and expectations you have?
So we're not really seeing the numbers drop off. We hope that, we're hearing there's going to be talks with Mexico to try to encourage Mexico to patrol their southern border. We're certainly hopeful that curbs some of the migration that we're seeing here. But our numbers we have just continued to watch the numbers increase with, other than about the last week, there has been some drop off in the amount of numbers that we're seeing come across the border illegally.
What does it mean for some of the other aspects of Border Patrol's mission dealing with criminal smuggling of drugs and other contraband to have to deal with the mission that you have right now, which seems to be, is it fair to say this is the most you've ever dealt with for crossings in this sector? Is it an all-time high?
It's an all-time high for us since we have been keeping the statistics or doing the electronic input of data. It is the highest numbers that we've seen. But I think, the most concerning, we're border security experts. We are supposed to secure national security. And the issue is when we're dealing with the dynamic of the tender age children that are coming across, and families, we have to remain focused on the single adults. Drug smuggling cartels, we're seeing a huge increase in the amount of fentanyl, the amount of cocaine, the amount of heroin. We've got about 80 pounds of heroin so far this fiscal year and almost 80 pounds of fentanyl. A little over 800 pounds of cocaine so far this year. Our meth numbers are high. Our criminal aliens are over 1,000. We've had over 1,000 criminals that we have arrested that were prior convicted in the U.S., deported, and have tried to enter again illegally. We've had over 114 sexual predators that we've apprehended so far this year. And those are concerning because of the threat that they have to the communities and wherever they're trying to go. So it's important for us to know everyone that's crossing the border and make sure that there's no threat. Some of those drug numbers that I mentioned and some of those criminal migrants that I mentioned as well, those are a threat to the community and national security.
Do we have any sense of how much the cartel is benefiting from the current inflow numbers in terms of what they're charging either per individual migrant they're taking across and what that might add up to in sum for whichever cartel is in direct control of these smuggling lines?
So that's a good question. The most important thing I think that a lot of people don't realize is that you don't simply walk up to the border of the U.S. and Mexico and cross into the U.S. without paying a smuggler or paying a plaza fee. Generally, for the most part, the numbers, what you pay is going to vary. Depends on where you're from, depends on what type of smuggling event you're going to be involved in, if it's by walking or by vehicle. But generally, the price starts at about $4,000 per person, and then goes up from there depending upon if you're going to be smuggled in a semi-trailer, or if you're going to be smuggled in a car, or if you're going to walk. But the important piece there is the smugglers control the plazas, and they control the traffic that's coming through the U.S. border.
So we're talking about, at a minimum, tens of millions, maybe into the hundreds of millions of dollars going into cartel hands just for the human smuggling component of this.
That's correct.
What could be done to turn this flow back? What could be done from just a Border Patrol mission standpoint, given the challenges you're facing to handle these unprecedented numbers?
So there has to be some type of consequence, be it whether it's a fair and equitable quick asylum hearing or a fair and equitable immigration hearing or something, but we simply cannot let people cross into the U.S. and let them go because that's just a pull factor for us. That just increases the amount of people that we're actually going to see come and try to cross into our border illegally. So there has to be a fair and equitable system, but there has to be consequences. You have to be able to return those that don't belong or have broken the law or don't have a right to remain in the U.S.
Chief Hastings, really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today. With thousands of migrant children filling it beyond capacity, the Customs and Border Facility in Donna, Texas, has become emblematic of the heartbreaking reality of our crisis at the southern border. While media access to the facility is heavily restricted and controlled, I met up once again with spokesman for the National Border Patrol Council, Chris Cabrera, to see the reality on the ground firsthand. We're at the Donna facility here in McAllen, Texas. We've got HHS and Border Patrol equities at play here. Tell us, what are we looking at behind us?
Yeah, at first it was these buildings in the back were just Border Patrol. That's where we were housing people, processing them until we could move them on to the next facility. And then it got overcrowded. HHS didn't have enough space for anybody. So then HHS started building in this same area with more tents so that we can move people from basically one tent to another, from Border Patrol custody to HHS, and then they get separated or moved out.
So just explain the chain of custody here, how it works. So we're right near the border. Border Patrol will pick up people, minors and adults, so juveniles and adults. They'll all be moved here. How does that process then work? What's going on behind us?
Usually what happens out in the field, they'll determine who's going where. In this facility, we'll get unaccompanied children and then family units that have children under a certain age that are going to be released into the country. So everybody that comes through here is getting released into the country at some point. And then from here, they'll go to different places, whether it's over to HHS until they can find them something more permanent in a HHS facility, or they'll go straight from here to the airport or the bus station and be released into the country.
And what kind of processing goes on? Why are some people held for days, sometimes even weeks? What's the delay?
Well, the processing on the Border Patrol side, we think we have a 72-hour limit. Most of the time we're done 24 to 48 hours. So the processing on our end is on time. What has been happening is HHS isn't doing their side of it, and they're not taking the people quick enough because they don't have the facilities. So that just creates a backlog on our area. So where we have space for say 500 to 700, now we have 5,000 or 6,000 because the front end of it is not doing their part.
About how many individuals are in this Donna facility at any one time?
I don't know about the HHS side, but the Border Patrol side, between lately 4,000 or 5,000.
So there's at least thousands then likely in the HHS
most
side
likely,
as well,
yeah.
Most likely. And is this the biggest or one of the biggest facilities? Are there larger facilities?
I think this is the biggest right now. I think one of the issues we're running into is we're the only agency that doesn't have a no vacancy sign. So when other agencies close the doors because they're already at capacity, Border Patrol doesn't have that luxury. When people come in, we have to take them and we have to process them, and that's where it's bogging down.
Is there any plan to expand even beyond this, or are there concerns that the flow may actually exceed even what the expansion here at the Donna facility can handle?
No, the flow has already exceeded this part right here. We're already well over capacity, 2 or 3 times capacity. I think they are planning on opening up other places throughout the country, whether it's soft-sided facilities like this or more of a conventional brick and mortar type building.
What kind of COVID protocols are in place for the migrants that are held in this facility? Do we have any sense of that? Is everyone being tested? Are people being tested before they're let into the interior of the United States?
Well, I think that's kind of depends on who you ask. If you ask the administration or up in DC, yeah, there's COVID protocols. If you actually go in there and you see an area that's designed for say 50 to 80 people and they have 500 in there. So the COVID protocols aren't being followed just because there's not enough space in there. Border Patrol doesn't test, but before they go into ICE or HHS custody, they test them at that point, and they won't get released if they have a positive test. However, there are some people that have been exposed, and yet, even though they tested negative, they're still being released.
And so the expectation for the administration keeps saying that they're gonna handle this. We're down here right now, as I'm speaking to you. The president has not been down here. The vice president has not yet visited here. Do we have any sense? Has the administration shared with the rest of the executive branch that's handling this problem what they expect to change between now and, say, the summer to handle this problem better? Do we have any sense of what the plan is?
Yeah, from my understanding, I haven't heard anything. Not to say that it hasn't taken place, but we haven't heard it down here. And I think if they want to get this thing fixed by summer, I think somebody needs to get down here and take a look, because it's bad. And it's only something that, unless you see it, you can't begin to comprehend the magnitude of what we're dealing with.
This almost looks like a small city that's being built here with these massive these facilities that are going up. This is the most you've ever seen?
Yeah, by far. Yeah, by far. I've been here almost 20 years, and I've never seen it this busy. And on top of that, before in the Border Patrol, you would have 1 or 2 problem areas in a sector, and just one sector was dealing with something that was insurmountable. Now we're having large chunks of the country. Texas is having problems in 2 or 3 places. Arizona's having problems. New Mexico's having problems. California's having problems. So it's not just a local problem anymore. It's just spread.
And we know that there are a lot of migrants who are coming in from the Northern Triangle countries, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. But you've also said, when we've been discussing what's going on, that there are people coming from countries that are all over the world.
Yeah.
Romania, China, Sri Lanka. Well,
yeah.
Where are you seeing surges in terms of population numbers and people coming from?
Right now we are seeing a surge in people from Romania. I know throughout the patrol we're seeing a good chunk of some Haitians, Cubans. We're seeing a lot of Cubans here as well. And then we have some South American countries like Venezuela and Nicaragua that we're seeing. But it's not just Central and South America anymore. It's coming from all over the world.
Are there unaccompanied minors coming from some of those countries, or are they all single adults that are trying to use this period of a particularly challenging situation at the border to get in?
And what we've seen is single adults and family units. We've seen adults with children coming through. I haven't seen them. I haven't seen them personally if they were unaccompanied children, but I know we are seeing family units from some of these exotic countries.
And is your expectation, just going into the next, let's say, 60 to 90 days, that there will be this number? I mean, we're seeing unprecedented numbers. Obviously, you've told me they're already well beyond capacity, these facilities. Is this likely to just increase? Is there a lull in the summer, then an increase in the fall? How does...
With something like this, it's not your traditional migrant traffic where people are coming to work. People are coming in and they're claiming asylum, so it has nothing to do with them actually coming in to work in the fields or any of that. So unless the administration does something or DHS does something to put a stop to it, which it doesn't look like they have any plans to, we're going to continue to see these huge numbers.
People say things like the border is open, there's a crisis down here. How do you react to that?
Absolutely right. It's been open for a while. And the thing is we knew it was coming. Once they started talking about pulling these policies off the table, we knew something was coming, and unfortunately nothing was put in to take that place to catch the backflow that was going to come from removing these policies.
What would stop, given your over 20 years doing this, what would stop the inflow that we're seeing right now, or at least lessen it dramatically as a policy?
Mandatory detention, mandatory removal. If you want to do some type of immigration reform, which arguably I think most people think that's needed, you can do that, but not until after you secure the border. If you start the immigration reform while the border's still open, by the time you finish the reform, more people have come in. So the only way to get to that reform is to secure the border and then start from there.
Chris Cabrera of the Border Patrol Union, thanks so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll have more with the First TV down at the border when we come back. It's easy to forget that the crisis at the border is in large part a humanitarian one. Tens of thousands of children, through no fault of their own, arrive at our southern border tired, hungry, and afraid, sent there by adults. These souls, who have often traveled for over a month to get here, arrive in need of care and love. Thankfully, there are organizations that are doing their part to help. During my trip with the founder of one such organization, we got you this footage from right as the crossings are happening. I'm joined by Victor Marks. He's the founder of All Things Possible, founder and president. We're right here in the Rio Grande Valley. It's about midnight, looking to see what's going on. Victor, thanks so much for bringing us out here.
Yeah.
What are we expecting tonight? What are we going to be seeing?
Well, there's a continuous flow of migrants coming across the border, which right behind us is the river. And since we rode up here, I think you'll have footage of a little bit of fireworks over there.
Yeah, we heard some of the cartel gunfire right as we set up here. That's something that just occurs right across the river. We got National Guard folks, we've got Border Patrol, a lot of security on this side. That side is Mexico, so.
Yeah, and it's cartels fighting it out, and that's one of the things that I think people need to know at home is that this immigration crisis, which it is it's caused by the cartels, and plus the policy that's been enacted by DC, on a federal level, that really encourages people to come. And that I think one of the things, like our organization deals with, is trafficking, human or child trafficking and sex trafficking. The danger, and it's happening right now, is that they will allow adults to come into our country as long as they have a child. So they will buy, snatch, bring children just to get it's really like a passport. They get a free in if they get a kid.
And what kind of role does the cartel play in the smuggling operations that we're seeing going on right here?
Yeah, you can't cross that river without going through the cartel. They control it depending on which one. And it is a very lucrative business. And again, they know what they're doing. And a lot of times with the flow of so many people, last night there was a few hundred people that crossed right here in this sector. And there's a couple of thousand crossing every night.
Have you seen someone with the wristbands, Bob? We've seen those reports before. So they have the wristbands. So they've paid for the plaza fee or the trafficking fee to get across.
Yeah, and it's very structured and organized, and it's data driven. It's more organized than people can imagine at home, and it will affect folks. So if somebody's watching from California to New York, when they come here, they're processed and they're released, and sometimes flown to different cities around the country. So believe me, it will affect people, and it is where they are right now. It doesn't have to be just on the border.
Now tell me what your group, All Things Possible, what you do here, what brings you down to the border?
Yeah, we got here with the hopes of trying to help women and children who were being brought across. And the deal, so many of them travel. We've met families, moms carrying kids who've traveled a month and a half to get here. So once they're here, they do need care. They need hope. They need love.
We've been seeing some of the migrant flow over the last 24 hours. You have very young children. Some are infants in the care of adolescent family members. So you have young children in the care of other children. Once they get to this side, what is All Things Possible? What are you doing to help out?
We're meeting them with our team and providing water, snacks, just to get them something, and then what we call a lion and the lamb. Again, there's a lot of trauma that happens and fear. So we're actually giving little stuffed animals. They're trauma toys that have music specific to lowering anxiety, as well as prayers to help children feel at ease. And you can see it when we give it to them. Some of them will start crying, some will start smiling, because we're greeting them with hope. And we've done this all over the world, especially in the Middle East. We saw how well this trauma toy works.
Have you ever seen numbers like this at the southern border before?
No, not at all. This is, that's one of the reasons why we're out here, to be able to show firsthand what we've seen to our constituents and followers on social media. It's beyond what people can imagine. And are there nefarious characters? Absolutely. Are they still running drugs? Absolutely. And that affects our country. I mean, we talked about it earlier, the number of ODs, the deaths in America because of drugs that are being smuggled in. People need to take that serious. That's the huge threat.
It's amazing just to stand where we are with the overlook behind. We can see Mexico across the Rio Grande.
Yeah.
You have children being smuggled in large numbers by the cartel. You have cartel gunfire in the background, the ongoing cartel war happening right there. We can hear it, you can see the city. You've also got, in this same sector, drugs flowing in. I mean, it seems like this is the biggest, at least domestic national security issue in the country right now.
It is, but I would say on the federal level, everything's real quiet. Everything's shut down here. And you have good, really good men and women working the front lines. But the problem is it's shut down as far as communication and media. For some reason, the federal government doesn't want the American people to know just how bad it is.
Yeah, we're coming up against that too. They're definitely closing doors all over the place.
Yeah.
Appreciate your work, and thanks so much for bringing us out here to show us what's really going on.
I'm glad y'all came out.
All right, that's all the time we have for this special edition of Hold the Line. I'd like to thank Chris Cabrera, Chief Brian Hastings, and Victor Marks for sharing their time and expertise and getting us a really important view of this crisis. Thanks for joining us. Shields high.